Potato had a dream, not the sleeping kind, the kind that lives quietly in the back of your head, the kind that shows up uninvited while you're doing something completely ordinary, washing dishes, staring out a window, scrolling through someone else's life at midnight. It whispers, not loudly, not urgently, just quietly, persistently, this isn't it. This isn't the thing you're supposed to be doing. He wanted to build something. He didn't always know exactly what. Sometimes it was a business, sometimes it was a creative project, sometimes it was just a better version of his daily life, more focused, more intentional, more like the person he kept imagining himself becoming. The details changed, but the feeling never did. That quiet pull towards something more. That quiet gap between where he was and where he wanted to be. And every single day he looked at that gap and decided to cross it tomorrow. Not today. Today wasn't right. Today he was tired. Today he wasn't inspired. Today he didn't have everything he needed. Today something else came up. Tomorrow, though, tomorrow he'd have more energy. Tomorrow the timing would be better. Tomorrow he'd finally feel ready. Tomorrow became his favorite word. And also, slowly, his most expensive habit. Here's the thing about Potato that most people didn't understand. He wasn't lazy. Not really. Lazy is when you don't care. Lazy is indifference. Lazy is sitting back and feeling nothing about the life passing by. That wasn't him. He cared enormously. He thought about his goals constantly. He felt the weight of them every morning. He went to bed every night with a low, quiet ache of, I didn't do the thing again today. That's not laziness. That's something else entirely. That's the feeling of someone who wants something badly, but has learned, somewhere along the way, to be more afraid of trying than of not trying, because not trying is safe. Not trying means the dream stays perfect inside your head. Untested, unbroken, still possible. The moment you try, really try, you introduce risk. You might find out you're not as good as you hoped. You might find out it's harder than you imagined. You might find out that the version of yourself you've been picturing doesn't show up the first time you call on him. And that possibility, that small, quiet possibility of disappointment, was enough to keep Potato exactly where he was. What made it complicated was that he was never actually sitting still. He was busy, always busy. He researched, he read, he watched videos about productivity and discipline and morning routines and the habits of successful people. He had 17 browser tabs open at any given moment. He had a notes app full of ideas. He had 3 different planning systems he'd set up and abandoned. He was, by every visible measure, someone who was working on it. Except he wasn't. He was doing everything adjacent to the work, everything that felt like progress without requiring him to actually produce anything. The research, the planning, the preparation, all of it real, all of it useful, none of it the thing. There's a particular kind of busy that protects you from doing the real work. It looks like effort. It feels like effort. But it's actually just movement without destination. A hamster wheel disguised as a career plan. Potato had been running on it for months, maybe longer. And the worst part was, it felt productive enough to justify not actually starting. He'd spent a whole afternoon researching the best way to begin, and called it a working day. Because here's what nobody tells you about the person who wants things but doesn't do things. There aren't one of them. There are 2. 2 versions of the same person, living in the same body, wanting completely opposite things. Version 1 is ambitious. Version 1 has vision. Version 1 watches other people succeed and feels genuine fire, not jealousy, just recognition. That's possible. I could do that. I want that. Version 2 is older, quieter, much more powerful than it looks. Version 2 doesn't care about the dream. Version 2 cares about right now, about feeling okay in this exact moment, about not being uncomfortable, not being embarrassed, not being in the awkward, exposed position of trying something and not being immediately good at it. Version 2 just wants to feel fine, and its solution is always the same. Not now. Later. Rest first. Start tomorrow. These two versions argue every single day, and version 1, the ambitious one, the one with the plan and the vision and the fire, loses almost every time. Not because it's weaker, because version 2 is faster. Comfort doesn't require a decision, it's just there. One tap away. Always available. Zero effort. Ambition requires you to choose it, actively, against the pull of everything easier. And the brain, the ancient, pattern-seeking, energy-conserving brain, will almost always take the path that requires less. Not because it's lazy, because that's what brains do. They optimize for the short term. They minimize discomfort. They choose the known over the unknown, the certain over the uncertain, the easy over the meaningful. The brain isn't sabotaging you, it's just doing its job. The problem is, its job description was written a very long time ago, before goals, before ambition, before the kind of life where delayed effort produces delayed reward. So Potato waited for motivation. He believed in motivation the way you believe in weather, that it was real, that it came from somewhere outside him, that if he waited long enough, it would arrive and make everything easier. Some days it did show up. He felt it, that electric, clean, almost physical feeling of wanting to work. He sat down, he focused, he made real progress, he felt like himself, and then the next morning it was gone, and the morning after that, and he'd wait again. What he never questioned was the assumption underneath all of it that motivation was supposed to come before the work, that the sequence was feel motivated, then start. It isn't. For almost everyone who actually builds things, the sequence is reversed. You start. You push through the first 10 uncomfortable minutes. And somewhere in the middle of the doing, the feeling catches up. Motivation follows action. It almost never leads it. Waiting for motivation to start is like waiting to feel warm before you put on a coat. It doesn't work that way. Then there was the other thing keeping him stuck. The thing that looked like a strength. Potato had standards. He wanted to do things properly. He wasn't going to put something out into the world that wasn't ready. He'd rather wait until he could do it right. He told himself this was integrity. It wasn't. It was the cleverest form of self-protection he'd ever invented. Because if the work is never finished, it can never be judged. If he never starts, he never has to find out whether he's actually good enough. The dream inside his head is perfect. The version of himself who hasn't tried yet is capable of anything. The moment he puts something real into the world, that safety disappears. What if he tries his best and it still isn't enough? What if he works hard and people look away? What if the thing he's been telling himself he would do turns out to be something he simply can't? Perfectionism kept that question safely unanswered. It dressed fear up in the language of standards, called it discipline. And Potato almost never called it what it was. Until one day he asked himself a different question. Not, am I ready? But what is staying here actually costing me? Not in the dramatic sense, not the big picture, life is passing me by speech. Just quietly, honestly. What does carrying this undone thing actually cost me every day? And when he sat with that question, he felt it. The low, constant hum of guilt underneath everything else. The slightly hollow feeling of scrolling through someone else's work when he had his own sitting untouched. The small but real weight of being someone who wants something and keeps choosing not to go after it. That wasn't dramatic. It was just honest, and it was heavy. He'd been carrying it for so long, he'd stopped noticing. So he made a decision. Not a big one. Not a loud one. Not a journal entry about new beginnings, or a note to himself about this being the year things change. Just a quiet, private decision. He was going to start, not when he felt ready, not when conditions improved, not when he had more time, more energy, more certainty, more confidence. Now, imperfectly, with what he had, because waiting had already cost him too much, and perfect was just another word for never. He started smaller than felt meaningful. This was important. The version of Potato who had been avoiding the thing for months had built it up in his mind until it felt enormous, impossible. A life-defining undertaking that required perfect conditions and full energy and absolute clarity. So he deflated it deliberately. He didn't say, "Today I fix everything." He said, "Today I do 20 minutes. That's the whole commitment. 20 minutes. One thing. Phone in another room." Not because 20 minutes changes everything, but because 20 minutes breaks the freeze, and a frozen potato cannot move. When the 20 minutes were done, he stopped. He didn't push himself to do more out of guilt. He didn't reward himself with 3 hours of distraction. He just stopped and sat with the quiet, almost embarrassingly simple feeling of, "I did the thing today." That was it. No transformation, no sudden clarity, no feeling that everything had changed. Just, "I did the thing," and he did it again the next day and the day after. Not because he became disciplined overnight, because he started building something more valuable than motivation. Evidence. Evidence that he was someone who showed up. Evidence that the task wasn't the mountain avoidance had made it feel like. Evidence that he could trust himself in small ways to do what he said he would do. He also stopped depending on willpower alone, because willpower isn't a character trait. It's a resource. It depletes. Every decision costs a little. Every distraction resisted costs a little more. By the time evening comes, the willpower account is nearly empty. And that's when the phone always wins. So instead of asking himself to be stronger, he changed the setup. Phone in a drawer before sitting down to work. One task written on paper before opening anything else. No tabs open that didn't need to be. The desk arranged so that the first available thing when he sat down was the work, not a notification, not a feed, not an easier option, just the thing. He didn't fight distraction anymore. He just made it slightly harder to reach than focus. That small difference changed more than he expected, but some days still fell apart. And when they did, he used to respond in a way that made everything worse. He'd feel guilty, then avoid thinking about the thing he felt guilty about. Then the task would grow heavier and more loaded in his mind. Then he'd distract himself to escape the weight. Then feel more guilty for doing that, a loop with no natural exit. The way out, he eventually learned, wasn't punishment, wasn't a harsh internal monologue about discipline and failure, wasn't staying up late trying to make up for the lost day. It was something so quiet, it almost felt too small to work. Acknowledgement, without drama. Today didn't happen. That's a fact. Tomorrow, 20 minutes. That's a plan, a clean line between what happened and what comes next. Not forgiveness as an excuse, forgiveness as a reset, because shame doesn't make people start. Shame makes people hide, and a hiding potato doesn't get anything done. The deepest change, though, wasn't in his habits. It was in the story he told about himself. For years, without ever saying it out loud, he'd believed something. I'm someone who wants things but doesn't follow through. Every time he didn't start, that belief got a little more solid, a little more permanent feeling, a little more like a fact about who he was, rather than a pattern he'd fallen into. He started replacing it, not with affirmations he didn't believe, not with a motivational speech he gave himself in the mirror, just a slightly different sentence. I'm someone who is learning to follow through. That one word, learning, did something important. It made the identity movable. It meant he wasn't locked in. It meant every small action was evidence for a new story, rather than confirmation of the old one. And every 20-minute session added to that evidence, quietly, without ceremony, one day at a time. Potato didn't become a different person overnight. He still had bad days, still felt the pull of the easy thing, still woke up some mornings and had to negotiate with himself just to open the document, still lost some of those negotiations. But something had shifted. The gap between who he was and who he wanted to be was still there. It just wasn't the same size anymore, and it was moving in the right direction. That, he decided, was enough. Not because small progress feels thrilling. It doesn't most days, but because the person making small progress consistently is on a completely different path than the person waiting for the big breakthrough. One of them is building something, the other is still making the list. So if you have the dream but can't seem to move, you're not broken. You're not lazy. You're someone whose brain has learned to reach for comfort first. And that is a pattern. Patterns can be changed. Start before you feel ready. Start smaller than your ego wants. Build the setup that makes focus easy. Drop the guilt when you slip. Pick up the action instead. And keep adding evidence. Because the person you want to become isn't waiting for you to be perfect. They're just waiting for you to begin.